And if you start to peel into this, like I think all of us owe it to ourselves to do our own work and do our own understanding of what all this is. But the best way that I've come up with off of my experience is that I had a lot of anxiety based off of the way I was breathing chronically, which had nothing to do with my thoughts and thinking. It had everything to do with my physiology and the underlying part of my internal processes. I was a mouth breather from a young age. I have braces on right now, but if we were doing a deep dive and taking pictures of my face, you could see the narrowness of my jaw. My tongue hangs low, so it sits in the back of my throat. If I'm not sleeping properly, I'll have bouts of sleep apnea. I have to tape my mouth when I sleep or work because my mouth is open. And if you look at pictures of me when I was a little kid, taking naps or sleeping, I was mouth breathing, I had allergies, I had strep throat, I had all these sort of things that was occurring. And I think that when I was 26 years old playing professional sports, I had just been such a chronic mouth breather for those 17 to 29,000 breaths my whole life that I just lived in this fight or flight state. And I had to remap the physiology of my body.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to ALLSMITH. Today's electrifying episode, I get to have this wonderful connection with a man that I met a few years ago whose experience in human performance and mental conditioning has transformed the lives of not only myself, but elite athletes in the MLB, the NHL, and the recent NFL. He's a former professional baseball player, a two-time All-American, and an author. You guys know I love connecting with authors of the books Breathe, Focus, Excel, and his most recent book, Without Words, which I'm excited to unpack here shortly. Please join us in welcoming the host of A Moment with Mart, the man, the myth, the legend, the unparalleled Harvey Martin. Welcome to the show, man.
Oh, man. Thank you for having me. That was absolutely beautiful. That was gorgeous. So thank you for that breakdown. I'm excited to talk to you, man. It's been a long time coming. I've been really anticipating this, and it's been awesome to kind of have you on my heels to push this through. And it's going to be a lot of fun to just chat with you.
Totally, man. I'm the guy that is going to slide into the DMs all the time just to be like, hey, what you're doing is dope. Let's connect when you're ready. Let's connect with it when you're ready. But I want to give some context. I don't know if our listeners know this. Sometimes, like, I think for the guest, because I've been a guest on other podcasts, it's like a little cringe to echo the modern terminology for some of the young kids, or ick.
Sure.
Hearing the intro as the consumer or as the guest. But somebody told me this once upon a time, and that is, let's just like pause, close our eyes for a second, kind of drop in, take a couple nasal breaths, and just self-reflect like being a high school athlete. And there's something to be said, like when you have a dope game on a Friday or Saturday, and then your name ends up in the local newspaper, and you come to school that Monday, and everybody's like, Harvey, like, I saw what you did. Like, that's so dope. Or there's something to be said. Or even if it's a local newspaper, like the school newspaper, like there's something to be said about validating somebody's like growth and their pursuit of doing cool shit. And so that's what I think about with the intro. It's like, yeah, I could just say the name. But it's cool to be like, you know what? You're on this show for a reason. And I want to highlight that. I want to give you a pat on the back, a high five, and a hug.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, I think that's the part that gets you, right? Because I think if you use the analogy, I'll just kind of connect parallels here to this connection. I remember the high school days when you would get the newspaper, and fortunately I was a pretty decent athlete growing up. So my name was in the newspaper frequently, and my parents were massive fans of my sporting career. And so it used to become, it was a really cool thing to see. My parents would cut out the part of me in the high school newspaper, and they'd post it on the fridge. And it, like I said, fortunately the last couple of years in both basketball and baseball, I was pretty recognizable and talented in the state. So I was frequently in the newspaper, and it became somewhat of like a dopamine effect or a connection to get your name and see that and see how proud your parents would get. Now, the reason why I'm saying that, as I hear you use that metaphor, which was perfect, because I was doing the eyes closed and thinking back to that moment. So I could literally see that in my memory. I think as you become an adult, I'm recently a new father. I'm married. I've lived all around the country. I've had different jobs. I've been in different professions. I'm 10 years out of being a professional. It'll be 10 years this summer will be since my professional athlete days. And I think hearing that about yourself, it's unique, because I think as you get older and have more responsibilities, I don't think you take time to necessarily digest, metaphorically, the newspaper article on the fridge.
Mm-hmm.
And, because I don't have anyone doing that anymore. I don't have someone who's putting that on the fridge for me. And I think that's just a natural part of maturity, but it certainly is a cool reflective process too. So yeah, I think once again, you nailed that intro for me personally, because it was just like, well, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah. It's such a special thing to reflect on, because now everybody and their mom has a highlight tape, but like back in the day, man, you had to be so legit to have somebody out there with like this handheld camera to try to like make a highlight tape of you or have you in the newspaper. Like somebody had to be physically present. Otherwise, nobody really knew what was going on at all these different high schools. And now with cell phones and with, so many cool video modalities, like they can be everywhere all the time. You can cut and paste. You can use CapCut. You can use all kinds of different AI technology to make everybody look like a star. So it's definitely tough to filter through some of the challenges. But back in the day, man, it meant something. And to get that love and validation from your parents who they saw you from infancy, putting in the hard work, navigating the messy middle, being horrible in the beginning at whatever sport, which all of us are going to be a white belt at some point. And then the progressive improvement over time. Like, I don't know, something about that is so raw and real to me that it feels fun to describe.
Yeah. I mean, it's perfect. It's a perfect description. I mean, I think you painted the picture really well there. Like, think about the effort that went into getting essentially a post in a newspaper like that. I mean, now you can have a post daily. And like you said, all those examples, you can have one big thing that you do and you can cut it and have posts coming out more than just daily. You can have multiple people acknowledging your work and these sort of things. But yeah, I mean, definitely when you're younger, that doesn't come out. I remember specifically, it was like the end of the week. For whatever reason, I feel like it was like Monday. The newspaper would come out on Monday of the weekend highlights, and so you'd play a basketball game on Friday or a baseball game on Friday and Saturday. And if you were good or talented or ranked, your name was in the newspaper. And I really do think that was Monday, because remember, I wonder what they do now for college. Because I remember Monday or one of the days of the week, I used to always go to the mailbox after school to see if I got new letters from colleges. I wonder how they're doing that now. That'd be curious. I haven't thought about that in a while, but yeah, those were always the highlights of the week, athletically.
Totally.
What university sent me something, maybe a pro team, and then did I get anything in the newspaper, and are the parents proud?
Yeah, totally. I think I told you briefly offline. So I lost my father in 2018, lost my mother just this last year. And so me and my brother and my sister have been cleaning out our childhood home. And Harvey, it is insane how the baby boomer generation holds on to so much quote unquote crap. And I'm just like looking through the closet. They've got all these old jerseys. They've got every shirt. And then finding newspaper clippings, man. Things that I was just like, I don't know, I had a decent game. Maybe somebody wrote a couple things about me once upon a time. Our team was okay. And then all of a sudden, like I go overseas and play professionally for a little while, and I'm on the cover of the sports section a few times, and like I literally was going through this closet, it's like full of dust and just like sticking to the bottom. They have everything, and I'm like, you know what? A part of me thought that was so stupid as a young kid. I'm like, just let it go. I'm gonna make better stuff later, but later may never come. You might get injured. Life gets a hold of you. Stresses. The plate gets full. Like, maybe you lose your opportunity. Like, shit happens. And dude, it was just like, I was supposed to be task oriented, like getting shit done. I couldn't help but take a couple hours to cathartically like shed some tears. Be like, whoa.
Oh, I bet.
Like they really cared. And I think moving forward as coaches, as friends, as athletes, as breathwork people within the healing space, I don't know, man, something that I keep falling back on is this concept of gas, which I describe as give a shit. Like when people actually care, you can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you ever experienced that fully outside of your parents, but with you being a new parent, like, what are some of the thoughts that I'm maybe potentially unlocking here? Because it's just, man, there's something cool about just like really believing in somebody. That might be the greatest gift you could give somebody else.
Yeah, I don't know if this will answer that directly, but I ironically had this thought with myself this morning. So I'm gonna answer this how my thought was this morning with my son Oliver, and we go on a walk. So I take him out for a walk every morning, and newborns are fascinating because it's like lottery. Like some days they're super quiet and sleep in, and you nail that morning, and you have time to kind of execute stuff. But then you have the random 3 days ago from 7 a.m. till essentially 11 and noonish. He was crying like the whole morning. And so I didn't get anything done. And that's always tough entrepreneurially. Before I had a kid, before I was even married, you could work 24 hours a day and you could be all gas, and you can do all these things. But one of the things that I was thinking about this morning as I was looking at my son, I was walking him, was I was thinking about the difference between when I got married and then the birth of my kid. And I was thinking about those two scenarios because I always felt when I got married, I never really thought I would get married going through my 20s. I got married in my early 30s. And not any negative or positive. I just, for whatever reason, I didn't really think that was something. It just was never on my radar. But eventually, fast forward, and I get married. And that was what I would consider the best day of my life. And the reason why I've considered that the best day of my life is it was a transcending energy that I didn't even know was possible. And I remember the whole day of my wedding. We did it in a really intimate setting. We got a house in the desert. We had all our family and closest friends, a small wedding, but we rented an Airbnb and everyone stayed there for basically the weekend. And then on Sunday morning, we got up, and I don't remember what time we got married, but we got married on a Sunday, and then we just had like a family day. And it was really, but the point is, it was very intimate. Everybody had been there for the weekend. And I couldn't stop crying the entire day of my wedding because all I could think about was like, all these people are here. They've been a part of my life from childhood, maybe aunts, uncles, cousins, obviously sister, mom, dad, best friends, my wife's best friends, my wife's parents. And you forge this love, this connection of love. And all these people are pouring love into you. And I couldn't, not that I don't know if I knew, I just don't think I knew what that was like. So the forceful radicalness of needing to acceptance that degree of love made it the best day of my life. Why I tell that story in parallel to my child is that I've tried to think, well, isn't the best day of my life when your kid's born, and you hear that all the time, isn't that the best day of your life? And it certainly is up there as the best day of my life. And maybe I will potentially say that is the best day of my life, but it was such a different form of love because I realized it wasn't a love where people were pouring into me like my wedding. It was the moment I saw him born, it was like instantaneously my brain went to pour love into this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was no longer into me. It was pouring love into something else. And so I thought about that on the walk this morning. I don't know if it answers the question, but I think it's a dynamic of like a lot of the meanings to life is just the capacity in the way in which we can love. And I think, I don't know, you can speak to the passing of your folks. It's like that in its own sense, I'm sure was rather beautiful. And that was a capacity of love. And it's even as you're filtering through the stuff of your childhood, it's like you feel and you start crying and emotions come up and there's love. And so I think it's all, I don't know what it is. I just think it's such a unique experience. And the child love capacity is so new to me that I don't know how to articulate it well enough. I don't know if I'm supposed to. I just thought about that this morning. I thought about how they were unbelievable days in my life, but they were entirely different. And going into the birth, I thought it was going to be similar to the wedding because I was like, this is the craziest love I've ever experienced. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I just assumed that that's what that would feel like when I had a kid. And it was deep love connection, but it was entirely different.
Yeah.
Like the feeling of it for me was wildly different. And that was what I came up with this morning as a thought is the depth of accepting love and how radically that was just forced on me as a wedding. And maybe I was resistant to accepting that beforehand. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And then the flip side of that is the pouring out of love. And now the love isn't coming towards me. Everyone's asking you about your kid. Everyone's asking you about this new person, this new family member.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an interesting experience. And like I said, I don't even have words to explain what I would make a conclusion out of that. They were just two unique experiences in my life.
Very special, man. The Trident family taught me something really important this last year, that we are all a bundle of stories, both good, bad, and everything in between. All of their cold brews remind their customers that they are part of something bigger than themselves. I start my day with the Sweet Cream Cold Brew as I am prepping my mind and body for fitness, service, coaching, and podcasting. With various locations in San Diego, they offer over 14 nitro cold brews and a variety of specialty drinks. You can find the perfect brew and pair it with one of their treats from the Keto Bakery. You can check them out over at tridentcoffee.com and use code ALLSMITH to take your coffee experience to the next level. Wow, I don't even know exactly where to begin there, but I will say, when you look right here, no, it's on this hand, sorry. I have love tattooed here. And
beautiful.
It echoes Ruben Rojas, which you probably know from Deuce Gym.
Yeah.
He's created his love brand, and I've become really good friends over the last couple of years.
Awesome.
I actually competed against him in CrossFit. He kicked my ass in a deadlift box jump workout in I think 2014 when he was with Brick CrossFit and I was with Valley CrossFit, which is funny. And we've stayed connected ever since. His brother kind of helped me navigate my pursuit of becoming a firefighter back in the day. There's all these connections, but what comes to mind, man, is I think we're here on this earth to love and to learn. Mm-hmm. And the learning's not always easy. Sometimes it's brutal, man. And I look back to being a recent man of faith that's trying to foster and build this relationship with a higher power. And what's coming to mind is, you mentioned a few times, I don't know that I have the words. And what I hear there is not everything is meant to be understood. Not every blank is meant to be filled. There's not an answer to everything, but there's a perception and a perspective to everything. And life's not always about what can be seen or heard or factually proved via science. Maybe it's about what you feel. And, that's not to give all the power to feelings, because that can definitely steer you down the wrong path and make you do cocaine and dopamine all the time. But I definitely think that just creating a zoomed out awareness to all of these things means that you come back to the physiological response of the breath, which you're an expert with, because we breathe between, correct me if I'm wrong, but 17,000 to 29,000 times a day. As babies, every single one of those breaths kind of matters. And then as we get older, they become less and less valuable, and they become what I would describe as unconscious competence. We're just kind of doing it as part of the day-to-day. And so that was a little bit of a rant and a tangent, but
no, it's beautiful.
What's stemming from that is just how did you build this fascination with breath? Because clearly you're a very observant man. And also just to throw a little nugget to people's way, I really do believe that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And simply going for a walk. Previously, that was solo. Then it became a walk maybe with you and your wife. Now it's a walk with you and your son, Oliver.
Yeah.
And it's simply going on that walk creates space for human curiosity, which then funnels into your experience as a man and how you view the world. So for people listening, nasal breathe and get your ass out on a morning walk.
And walk. There's a lot there that is that I agree. I'm fully in alignment with, and I really love. And I'll unpack on my end, and maybe we ping pong for a second off of it. But I think there's a lot there, because what comes to me when I first met my wife, obviously you start dating and you meet people and you become friends with someone, and you end up kind of joining as one when you hit the the conclusion of the marriage, and then you have a marriage, right? And we're existing in that currently. I remember the first time I was talking to my wife, then she was my girlfriend. I was saying to her, I was like, yeah. There was some funny moment we had together, and I just told her, she asked me who I was. I said, I'm just a man on a walk. So it's funny that you say that, because I was highlighted a lot with a lot of professional athletes the last couple of years in San Francisco for walking. And, newspapers or media, we would take our shoes off and go on walks. And obviously it's not as, I guess, regular in major league sports of just watching people walk. And so they formed that into a lot of the media and stuff that we did over the years. And it kind of became a funny little bit inside the clubhouse after a few years of just, this guy just goes out on walks. But I've thought about that a lot lately. Frederick Nietzsche, I believe, I hope I'm not screwing this up, he had a beautiful line of never trust a thought unless it happened outdoors. And he was basically talking about the ability to just go walk and think. And so I do think there's a lot of power in simplicity. And I think it's the same thing with breathing. And so to go back to what you were saying about words and without words, the recent book that I just published, Without Words, is based off of what you just said. Because when I first got into breathing, I was similar to, I think, I don't want to generalize this to specifically breathing, but I'm going to need to for my personal interpretation of what this whole thing is. But when you find something that changes your life, I think a natural instinct is that you want to change everybody else's life. And I don't think that's, I'm not going to say that's good or bad. I just think that's a natural, innate thing.
That's why I won't shut up about the cold plunge, man.
Yeah, it's just a part of our hardwiring for whatever reason. And so for me, you shared your cold plunge experience and the impact and the transcending or transformational experience that was. Well, I had a similar experience. I had anxiety playing baseball. I had performance anxiety, and I got released from anxiety. I no longer could play the game. I just had such a deliberating anxiety that I could no longer perform. I would have like these panic attacks in game. And so I ended up getting released. They put me on a lot of training practices for a couple months to try to obviously alleviate this. This is when I was in the minor leagues with the Milwaukee Brewers at the time. And I got released in 15, about 10 years ago. And the only thing I didn't want to do is I didn't want to take medication. I wanted to see if I could do it all natural to get rid of anxiety. And I think athletes, we're very goal oriented. We come up in structures, routines, and we kind of find paths and systems that help us. And so I wanted to give myself the chance to get out of anxiety naturally. I don't know why. I don't know who was guiding me on that. I just, for whatever reason, I remember that being very motivating to me. And so I met a guy who kind of gave me a breathing. It was Wim Hof. He introduced me to Wim Hof. I think Wim Hof had just come out on Joe Rogan or something along these times in 2015. I don't remember how this landed, but he was kind of in the mix. And I was living in Minnesota, and I didn't like cold, and I'd been toying with meditation. Clearly, anybody I think who's in sports who has anxiety or any performance finds their way to the breath in some way, shape, or form as a way to alleviate nervousness. And it's very general. It's very naturally to communicate about breathing. So I just took some things that I'd already been doing and I elevated it. And I had set a 16-week goal to do breath work every day, non-negotiable. And I would up my cold exposure. And I started with showers because it was too hard for me to even take a cold shower, especially because my body was in such fight or flight that any cold would jack me up. And so I couldn't there's no way I was able to do a full body cold exposure, but I would do, like, I remember minimally, I started with about 15 seconds in a cold shower. Right. And so I would do breath work for whatever, 10, 12 minutes, 15 seconds in a cold shower. And then I'd increase it, 15 minutes of breath work, 30 seconds of cold shower, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually 16 weeks later, I was doing 5-minute cold showers, 20 minutes of breath work. It turned into this 30, 40-minute morning routine. And the point is, it was all routine oriented. It was athlete oriented. It was goal driven. I had my goals that I wanted to attain. And then eventually in the winter, in December, I had a friend who came out and guided me, and I went and did, from memory, it was about 7 minutes in Lake Minnetonka, which is a really huge lake in Minneapolis. If anyone's been in Minneapolis in December, you know how cold it is. And I had that experience that you shared with me before we got on air. You were talking about when you first got in there and you got connected with your breath, and it just kind of changed you. Well, that's what happened to me. And it took me many years to sort of talk about this publicly, and the fact of just the simplicity of, to me, that was a moment in my life in which, however I interpret things or understand things, that was a moment in my life that I was with God. And, you know, I packaged that in many ways over the last decade of what that moment was. But if I really try to understand it, I cannot explain what that was. It was a moment that was beyond me. I was too present. I was in nature. You could see the pine trees. There was snow everywhere. I was super kind of scared because I didn't know if I would die, you know, in the
It does feel like that when you're in the cold. Like, am I going to die? Like, you're freaking out for a second.
You're freaking out. So for me in that moment, I had this crazy moment where I was present, and I got out of that, and I didn't use a heat source. I didn't hot tub. I didn't sauna. I just got out and I just kind of recovered my breathing, and I realized that I could handle that stimulus. And I still was not, I guess, alleviated of anxieties or some of the depression that I was experiencing, but I definitely felt better. And I most importantly felt alive. And that was like the moment where I didn't go back. So if we talk about you're essentially going to go all in on something, that was when I was like, I need to figure out what that was. And it took me about another year or two of studying, whether I had to podcast people, go to workshops, entertain my network to get resources of doctors or certain trainers that I could sort of try to study from. I didn't come from an educational background, so I didn't have anything in psychology or physiology that I kind of could rely on educationally. So I did it just kind of the streets route, you know, just kind of pounded pavement and found people I could communicate with. And I did my thing. And about 2-3 years, I don't remember the window. That was 2015. We'll say by 2018. By 2018, I came up with, which is familiar now, especially in our field, I understood that physiology was first to psychology. And that was when it clicked with me in terms of what health was for me. Mm-hmm. I really started to understand it was physiology first. And in 2018, I got fortunate. I had a couple of pro athletes who started training with me for free. And they, you know, on the back end, they felt like it helped them enough to do breath work or cold and heat, et cetera. And so they promoted me and pumped me up. And by 2019, I had a kind of a business that was generating money. And by 2020, I had a full-blown business, and the rest was history. In 2021, I was in the major leagues and being a human performance coach. And I think since now at 2025, I've been training pro athletes regularly and Olympians and musicians, and kind of been in this space, I guess, for a couple years. But if I could finish that thought full circle, when I wrote the book Without Words, it was because I'd realized that I'd spent all those years trying to essentially mask the insecurity that I had of not having an educational background, yet working at these high levels with these high performers. And I published a book with an educational publisher, and I had all these things, and I felt like obsession and need to provide answers through research and science and words. I had to have that because I was behind the 8 ball already educationally. And so I obsessively studied and trained, and I became very articulated in science and literature and understanding research. And I just, for whatever reason, about a year ago, I came to another awakening when I realized that I can't teach anybody anything. I can't tell anybody anything. And the simplicity of following your breath, becoming aware of awareness, and going for a walk, you realize that that's who you are, and you can't justify who you are. And so with words, we become material by proving or providing answers to who we think we are. And I think we package all that with science and literature to our domains or whatever we need to justify things. But in reality, the main thought of who I am or who you are or what we're teaching or what we're learning, I don't think can be acquired through words. And I think that ultimately that brings you to a faith that's without words. And I tried to paint the picture of the last decade, but that's sort of what came to me just now. And
Harvey, that's so beautiful, man. I think it's so eloquent that you navigated the School of Hard Knocks experiences the peaks and valleys of feeling not good enough, feeling like you didn't hit the education nail on its head, feeling levels of inadequacy, but then also seeing like what this protocols, these things are working. They're helping all these high performers. I have proof of concept here. I don't know necessarily how measurable it is, but I know that these guys are feeling better. They're performing better, and we're making some sort of difference here. And so I think listening to that heart's whisper, you zoom out and you come to realize that like education is wonderful. It is, tinkering in the lab. It's playing with experimentation. It's going through all kinds of observation and trying to collect data. But it's still a made up construct to create buy-in, to create some sort of marketability. I mean, we see it with big pharma. Like if you could package sauna and cold plunge into a pill, it wouldn't be on a shelf ever, the experiences that people would have, because I'm a huge believer of like, I don't know that people are anxious or that they are depressed. I think that they experience anxiety and experience depression. There's not really a huge measurable associated with that. You could tinker with dopamine or serotonin or look at some of those levels, but like I would then zoom out and look at lifestyle factors of like, what's the environment that you're in? Who are you spending time with? What's a morning routine look like? What's an evening routine look like? How much sleep are you getting? What does your food look like? How much movement are you getting within a week? I bet if we tinkered with those variables first, it would move people probably towards the messy middle in between anxiety and depression to a level closer to optimization that allows them to have a pretty good frequency within life. And I'm speaking in generalities here. There's obviously exceptions to the rule. There's drugs that get involved. There's all kinds of traumas that can impact these things. So I'm not speaking on a high horse by any means, because I've definitely gone through the rabbit hole of both anxiety and depression symptoms and kind of tinkered with them, which is what eventually led me to sauna and cold plunge and breath work and shifting of environment and all those things. So, I mean, it's very real. But I also think there's this malleable architecture within the headspace that if you maintain optimism, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, even when you can't see it, that you can do activities and expose yourself to things that will force you to adapt, that will move the needle in the right direction. And it's typically exposure to discomfort that then shows your resilience, enhances your confidence. And then when you look over your shoulder, development of proof of concept that you are who you once thought you were when you were just a young kid full of piss and vinegar that wanted to be everything under the sun.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. You had me thinking. Because it's a lot like when I think a lot about medicine in these sort of modalities of medicine, it's a practice of obedience. And as you mentioned just now, when you do things that are uncomfortable or stressful to you, well, then you become alive. And if you start to peel into this, like I think all of us owe it to ourselves to do our own work and do our own understanding of what all this is. But the best way that I've come up with off of my experience is that I had a lot of anxiety based off of the way I was breathing chronically, which had nothing to do with my thoughts and thinking. It had everything to do with my physiology and the underlying part of my internal processes. I was a mouth breather from a young age. I have braces on right now, but if we were doing a deep dive and taking pictures of my face, you could see the narrowness of my jaw. My tongue hangs low, so it sits in the back of my throat. If I'm not sleeping properly, I'll have bouts of sleep apnea. I have to tape my mouth when I sleep or work because my mouth is open. And if you look at pictures of me when I was a little kid taking naps or sleeping, I was mouth breathing, I had allergies, I had strep throat, I had all these sort of things that was occurring. And I think that when I was 26 years old playing professional sports, I had just been such a chronic mouth breather for those 17 to 29,000 breaths my whole life that I just lived in this fight or flight state. And I had to remap the physiology of my body. And that's why I feel like I've found I will use the word cure in the fact of just being aligned with nature in the modern world, because we're not going to devolve. If I'm going to work with organizations or the profession that I have, I'm in major mass cities. I'm in San Francisco. I'm in LA. I'm in San Diego. I'm in Phoenix. I'm in New York. I'm in all these pots, right? And the way that I've come to understand a lot of what I'm saying right now from a philosophical and historical sense is that industrialization of the population has put us into this world where everything of convenience and comfortability, which I don't think is not known at this point, but it's coming to grips with our generation, is starting to understand how detrimental the impacts of comfort and convenience is. And it's happening unconsciously. It's the design of our environment. And what are we going to do? Like I said, we're not going to degrowth industrialization. Like San Francisco is, if you just fly over San Francisco, it's a concrete jungle. Like that beautiful bay is concrete. So what are we going to do? We're not going to go to full eucalyptus trees and sit in the sauna and bathe. And this is what life is. And so I think now the modalities for health have become these extremely simple, but uncomfortable things that make you feel human. And I think the disconnect where we're at is we largely don't feel human. And when we feel human, we have access to a bigger container of consciousness. And I think that's the point of being obedient to simplicity. And because we're in information era, we're just overloaded with stimulus because we're all fighting for attention. We're all striving to be the beacon of right, if you will. I talked to a couple athletes I worked with the other day, and I told them, I said, art as a teacher, art is to create the student or the athlete in this scenario to be self-reliant. Through commercialization, the art needs you to be reliant. And that's business 101 in America. Like, as a commercialized state, we need people to be reliant on us in order to maintain the flow of resources, largely financially. And so if we all knew how to breathe, go on a walk, eat natural food, go to sleep, and find something that is meaningful to us that generates wealth, well, then we become so self-reliant that would disrupt a lot of commercialized places that need you to be reliant.
So well said. And what comes to mind there, Harvey, is as kids, we spend our whole life wanting to escape the home in pursuit of this preconceived outward adventure of FOMO, wondering what else is out there. And then once we go and explore all of that and life gets a hold of us, we get exposed to commercialization, to the rat race, to consumer culture. We want then to spend our whole life trying to come back to the home, and that nurturing feeling of just originally being in the womb. But then, as you described with your son, like, what comes to mind there for me is it's like playing in the sandbox. Like, that in theory is what we're doing in this human experience of, like, we're feeling the sand. We're kind of carving out, like, where in the sandbox we want to be. And it's like, hey, Harvey, you want to come play with me? And, like, I'll build this castle, you build that castle. And then we can, like, build a bridge under the sand that we connect our castles. Or, that right there is collaboration. It's playful architecture. It's connection. But then to take it even a step further, it's like minimalism. We think, if I just throw money at the problem and take this pill or inject Ozempic or, go to this thing, I'm going to get the information to solve the problem. But maybe, as Matthew McConaughey once said, which I'm a huge fan of him and I talk about him often on the show,
me too.
Maybe it's not about who we are, but more importantly, who we are not. And I think throughout life, we start thinking, maybe we're this, maybe we're that, or we like certain things from different flavors or different people or different styles or different sports. But then when it comes down to it, when you want to heal, it's more of like this minimalist mindset. Like you said, you go on these walks and you have people take their shoes off so they can just get grounded. They're not reliant on this now barrier between you and the earth. And maybe there is some sort of energy exchange and grounding that we've seen out there. Maybe there isn't. But at the very least, you get to spread your toes. You get to kind of have some dexterity. You get to feel the earth. You notice oh wow, the feet are the foundation of everything else. Now I feel my ankles, my knees, my hips. Now
Mm-hmm.
I'm paying attention to those things versus before it was just get from point A to point B, smash a dip, get a freaking caffeine hit. Let's go do the thing because that's all people care about. And it's just like, that nervous
Mm-hmm.
system is all fight or flight. And so where I
Mm-hmm.
want to go with this is to give people some context, like what is the nervous system, right? We've talked briefly about fight or flight. We talked a little bit about rest and digest. Let's create some education there for people that maybe are unaware of some of these things and how some of this
Yeah.
simplistic grounding and primal minimalist activities can add value to their lives.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Let's see if this lands for just an ideology around the nervous system. The nervous system, in the most simple way I feel like we could explain it, is I always imagine is like if you think of your skull and you have a brain inside of that, it's like your brain's in this black box. And so the nervous system hangs down. It's like an electrical, I think of it as like a violin string.
Mm.
And that string, the way that it's getting touched through inputs from it can be internal or external. We'll call it a sensory input, largely around your senses. However, that string is getting touched, it's signaling up to that mush inside a skull, that black box, basically what's going on around you. And largely that turns into a reactive or responsive decision. And that's where a lot of the stuff becomes really important about the environment. But to not go into that, let's stay on the nervous system. So if I think of, okay, well, what is that string hanging down from my brain? Well, that's your CNS, that's your central nervous system, which largely in a lot of my work, it's governed by two spots. It's either the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight, or it's your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest. If we simplify it for a lot of the people that I communicate with, I literally just put it into sympathetic is stress and parasympathetic is adapt. And so you can even get away from language. You can just think of it like that. Our nervous system is governed by stress and adapt, stress and adapt. Obviously, just simple understanding, the more we adapt, the more we evolve, the more we have access to vitality to explore things, because we're largely what you're saying about the children in the play box. We're in the sandbox. We're essentially explorers. We're built to explore, and we need energy to be useful. So the more energy we have, the more adaptability or flexibility that we have in our nervous system. We're not as rigid. Therefore, we're essentially healthy. I'm trying to say this as simple as possible for those scenarios. Now, okay, the analogy that one of my mentors, Brian McKenzie, said this to me years ago, and that's just stuck with me because I also have a dog. He used the analogy, if you look at nature and you use an animal, for instance, he said nature in the animal kingdom, they resort essentially exactly to how the nervous system exists. So if my dog lays around all day, which it does, it lays around the entire day sleeping because it's in parasympathetic, it's in adaptive states. It sits in this digestive, bigger container, reflective, adaptive position. And then let's say it needs to pee, or it's been sitting all day and it starts to feel anxiety, it starts to feel sympathetic activity, it starts to feel fight or flight activity. Literally all I have to do is take the dog out for a walk or throw a frisbee at it until it starts to do what? Starts to pant, mouth breathe, and it'll just naturally fall when it's time. And when the dog falls, my dog's name is Rocky, I'll take Rocky in and just give Rocky some water. Rocky will now take the water and then go back to sleeping. And it goes back to parasympathetic. And it's cool to just watch animals. If you have dogs or people who have dogs, it's beautiful because you literally just watch a nervous system the entire time. I'm watching that with my son. I'm just watching a nervous system. For us, as we get older, our nervous system's compiled with our greater states of consciousness. So we have cognitive thinking. We're conscious, subconscious, and then we kind of have the unconscious inside of that. And so we have the ability to stress in our minds when we're not supposed to be stressing. And I think that has a lot to do with the modern demise of our unconscious environment, because our unconscious environment, as I mentioned, cities, air pollution, the food we eat, the mass amount of the way in which we set up our working system. Obviously, the easiest one to target is social media and the constant stimulus in which we get from information. And we're essentially now interconnected with 8 billion people where we have access to what's happening in the world at all times. So a lot of the theories or the concepts of the modern nervous system is that it's always in this fight or flight, turned on stimulus state. And it's not having the analogy I just gave of the dog where it can lay down and take its nap. We're just constantly on. And so systems don't work like that. Nervous systems don't work like that, which is why, if I leave my house and I drive 20 minutes, every available street corner has access to artificial uppers and downers. And so if I don't have what you're saying about like the feet or the awareness to self and feeling my body, being mindful of my body, well, society tells me to stay on. Therefore, I'm unconsciously going to just use what's around me. And that's how you find yourself filtering through the unhealthy systems. But I got away from the nervous system. We can go back into that, but does that at least paint a picture?
No, it paints a phenomenal picture. And I think so many people are feeling that. They feel this internal expectation to constantly be enrolled in hustle culture, constantly be available because of the computer box in their pocket. And then as a byproduct, they're using tools to then navigate that pursuit of always being on. Do I need caffeine? Do I need alcohol? Do I need marijuana? Do I need Adderall? Do I need stimulants? And then we abuse those to be on until we are like, oh, the body keeps the score. I'm feeling like shit. My throat's a little scratchy. I've got some brain fog. I'm experiencing pain. My workouts haven't been as good. Oh, now I need the magnesium, the melatonin. I need the downers. I need all these different things to now rest and digest. And then in doing so, you get this subconscious feeling of guilt. Oh, I'm turning off, almost plugging in the iPhone to then get back to this other thing, which is where I gain validation. And it's this constant push or pull of like caffeine, melatonin, just to like simplify it into 2 words. And it becomes the rat race. There's no connection with self. You lose the understanding of like, what does it even feel like to be hungry? What does it feel like to have mental clarity? Because I'm so used to being in chronic fatigue. I'm so used to satisfying everybody else's expectations in order to monetize and fill the bank account and do the things that, are measurable. And then as a byproduct, it leads to sickness. It leads to being reliant on reactive medicine and big pharma in the form 100%. Of whatever things. And I don't know. I think there needs to be bravery. There needs to be courage to be like, okay, I'm going to press pause for a second. The analogy that I really like is the nervous system in fight or flight is like I just jumped into a pool and I'm constantly fighting. And then there's waves everywhere. There's splashing. There's bubbles. I really can't see shit. But then when I press pause for a second and I kind of push out air, going back to our breath concept, now I can kind of float to the bottom of that pool and I gain some mental clarity.
Yeah, you make a decision.
Now I can clearly think and I can decide optimal dosage, right? Because too much of anything is bad. Too little of certain things, you're not doing enough. And so now we can play around with, okay, how do we do what I describe as lifestyle design and create a beautiful life based on the value systems and the things that matter to me, based on clear thought and the integration of a regulated nervous system, which is going to be high sometimes and low other times. What are your thoughts on kind of this concept and how to create a beautiful life, which also encompasses high performance for some of our top-notch athletes and people that want that to be integrated into their beautiful life?
Yeah, well, bring Nietzsche back into the situation. Friedrich Nietzsche's work, he wrote this in the 1800s, and he's got 2 beautiful books, Anti-Education and Anti-Christ, that are somewhat on the same vein. Anti-Education, he writes it more like through his essays and lectures that he gave. But he says something that I think ties into what you just said, and it'll help me answer this question. There's a point in the book where he says he's talking about education is going to only get worse through the forever, essentially. And this is, like I said, written hundreds of years ago. But the point of the education system that would only get worse is because we naturally default to conformity. And this is the hardwiring of what we are as a species. So we will default to the easiest thing. And that largely comes in the form of conformist. And I say this in a valuable sense because his line in the book that really stood out to me, and I could butcher this a little bit, but it was very accurate to what I'm about to say. He says, whatever is fundamentally right will always be the hardest thing to do. And I highlight that line because to me, and this is my perspective, that is the truth behind health. And so if you're going to literally considerize the actuality of you personally being healthy, then you need to think about it to the highest degree of potential and the narrowness of what that's going to take in obedience. And I think that you need to sit down, you need to reflect on that, and you need to ask yourself that perspective. Like, if I'm going to have a lifestyle designed for me, it can't be what yours is. It has to be for me. In order to do that, I'm going to be a nonconformist. And by being a nonconformist, that means that I'm going to be lonely, and I'm going to attach God to this scenario, because if I'm lonely materially, because we are a species that want to be seen materially, egotistically, I want to be seen and accepted. And so therefore, loneliness in the sense of being accepted is a material, egotistical side, and that will be lonely. And largely the reason why we can divert away from that, that's why we become conformist. I will do what you say to do. Therefore, we put health in the hands of other people. I think that I would be the flip side of that if I'm going to talk about this at its highest peak. You would think of loneliness, if your connection to God in that scenario is God is the only person who can hear you, completely understand you, you can justify yourself to God, whatever that is, whatever that divine power is. And to me, that goes back to the whole point of my last book, Without Words, is that I can't justify or tell you who I am. The only person that I can communicate with like that is God. And so now if we pull in some more history of this, Rumi has a cool quote. He was 13th century poet, maybe a 14th century poet. I can't remember. He had a quote that says, when we're in silence, we're with God. And so if I'm talking about health materially, my life, the design of my life, I would sit in silence and get truth from my higher being, which would intuitively help me guide my decisions. Therefore, since I'm doing this intuitively, off of my own sense of vitality, I cannot inevitably feel lonely materially, but most importantly, I cannot conform, because I'm not everybody else. I am me. And so in that sense, you have to take the truth pill of what health means to you and what is health. And I think that the answers come back to us the same. There's no way that sitting in silence and breathing and observing egotistical thoughts, past and futuristically running by your consciousness, there's nothing, how is there anything that's not healthy about that? Scary, yes, very scary. If someone hasn't meditated and you put someone in a room for 30 minutes and tell them to sit there in silence, that's going to be incredibly hard. Mm-hmm. And the fear of that is going to drive nonconformists, because you're going to have to become connected to something bigger than yourself. Mm-hmm. So you're fundamentally going to learn your own truth.
You're going to learn to be small. You're going to learn to not necessarily feel like you have to be at the top of the pedestal, but a man or a woman of service. That's a part of the process.
100%. And I think that those are the things that we disassociate our attention to health. Like I stopped drinking this March 2 years ago. And I had a friend ask me this at dinner the other night. He was asking me about sobriety and how to be sober. And I said, sober is very simple. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, because you have to be sober today. And then when tomorrow you wake up, you got to be sober tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And then the next day when you wake up, you got to be sober again. And the only thing you have to do is be sober. And that's it. It'll be the hardest thing you will ever simply do. Mm-hmm. And I use the word simply there because it's extremely hard. And everywhere you go, it's hard not to drink. It's hard not to do drugs, because it's everywhere. If you go to any major league sporting event in America, the large scale advertisements that are flying over the stadium or working within the stadium are alcohol. Mm-hmm. So everything in your unconscious design, your lifestyle design, it conforms you to not listen to the silence that lives inside of you. And so it's a lot easier to just conform and run it back and rinse and repeat and get hungover and then just sauna on ice the next day and detox. It's just super easy to do all that.
For sure.
And I think the hardest thing to do, by far is to walk the narrow walk to whatever your intuition guides you towards, and do that obediently and do that daily. And then realize, while you're doing something so unbelievably simple, yet so drastically hard and treacherous, is to not be so scared of the next 60 years in front of you, or the next 80 years in front of you. And that's why I think sobriety is an amazing teacher. The most high I've ever been has been being sober, because I can't be sober for 60 years unless I'm sober today again. And so I have to do that over and over and over and over again. And I think that's why I brought Nish up initially, because he's writing about education, but that line has hit me. I've been in the health field my entire career. That line has hit me as a truth of health just as much as it is when he's talking about an educational system.
Can you say that line one more time just to remind people?
Yeah, so basically what he was saying is, doing whatever is fundamentally right will always be the hardest thing to do. And since he's saying, because it's so hard, you will naturally conform. And that's the thing I've seen with pro athletes and performers, and myself included. It's very, very,
it takes
very,
a level
very
of maturity though, because if I were to put myself into those shoes, my stubborn ass tries to do the hardest thing, but then that leads to lack of consistency, right? So it's like, oh, if I just go all gas, no brakes over here in high intensity, the consistency drops off. So I started studying and looking into Jesse Itzler a little bit. And he talks about 18 minutes, 9 minutes in the morning, 9 minutes in the evening, and 18 minutes a day, 365 days a year, gives you 100 hours. And when you accomplish a task for over 100 hours, it puts you in the top 95% of that task. And so for a very long time, 3 or 4 days a week, I was super high intensity with training, sauna, ice, business, go, go, go. But then for 3 days, I felt like I was being hit by a bus. Well, 4 out of 7, the percentage of that. So I was like, oh, maybe the hard thing is not necessarily the hard thing, but the consistent thing. Maybe being consistent is harder than doing hard. And so that was like a fun dichotomy to tinker with. And I'm not saying that's for everybody, but it's just a personal experience that I feel like is relatively relatable. Like, what are you willing to do consistently 5 to 7 days a week as opposed to 3 or 4 days a week? And you'll probably move the needle in the right direction in a more efficient way.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with what you said with timing and dosage, because that's where I think it comes down to, is like, we can become consumed with needing to meditate for 40 minutes a day, right? Or we have to do this walk, or we have to do, you've seen it all the time in heat and cold, right? You think like when Susanna Soberg's research came out recently, it was like a massive win for the sauna cold industry, because it gave us a template for time in the cold. It was, if you do 12 minutes of cold, that has produced research-wise to be the standard of cold exposure for a week. If you can do 12 minutes a week, however you get there, uncomfortably cold, you've hit your standard. And I'm guilty of this as well. Like, I had some research to back up what I was doing professionally. And it was just super easy to say, okay, 4 times a week, get in the cold tub for 3 minutes, because you get your 12 minutes. It's the same thing with the sauna. Get your 60 minutes at this temp. And you could sort of build protocols off that, which is what we need. We need research and science to help us design structure. And that's all beautiful in its own way. But at the same time, if you've been sick for a couple of days, or you've been traveling and you've been changing time zones, biologically changing a time zone and flying is so new to the human species that disrupts the chemistry of your body immensely. And so to be, I guess, a slave to a protocol or a rigidity of needing to do something, you hurt yourself. But that goes back to what you were saying when you drop in the pool, is that when you have the moment where you kind of let go and you observe and you pay attention, I think that just comes back to intuition again. Like, you understand your own timing and dosage. And that's what I was telling you about, the paradox to teaching that I had a struggle with about a year ago, because I found myself so driven by giving answers to people. And I knew deep down in my core that was just not the truth. I can't tell you how long to sit in a sauna or cold. I can't tell you what breath practice.
You have to feel it. And a lot of my friends that have done it often, like, you start to feel, you build the relationship with it. And what's coming to mind, Harvey, is just the cliche quote that we've all heard often from James Clear from Atomic Habits. We don't rise to the level of our goals, but we fall to the level of our systems.
I love that.
And
Yeah.
I think the challenge that you and I both face, and other healers and other coaches within the world face, is like, hey, if you're communicating with somebody and you're like, hey, go on a 10-minute walk today, listen to your favorite song, listen to a podcast, call a friend, nasal breathe the entire walk, and wear some barefoot shoes to connect with the earth. Try to spread your toes. And if and when appropriate, try to get as much skin exposed to sunlight. People are like, why the fuck am I paying this person to tell me to go for a fucking walk?
Yeah, they are.
And so you're now pressed to create buy-in. You're now pressed to throw research. You're trying to do this thing to justify how you're going to make a living.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's just like compliance is science. I'm telling you this to do the fucking thing because I've done it and I've had hundreds of other people do it and it works.
Yeah.
And you create this buy-in over the course of trust, over the course of time. The research helps with that. It shows when you consistently care and you listen and you're there and you're present. But from a business standpoint, man, jumping our conversation to the business of fitness, telling somebody, hey, go sauna for 60 minutes a week above 185 degrees. Try your best to keep your shoulders down and back and breathe in and out of your belly. When it's possible, try to do that with tribal connection and share that experience with other people. In the midst of that, get into the cold 12 to 15 minutes a week. Those two things are seemingly like check the box things, but they're also like, wow, if you just did those things. I didn't even talk about fitness. I didn't talk about journaling. I didn't talk about finances. I didn't talk about sleep or food. If you just did those things, your nervous system would probably be a little bit closer regulated than in this like fight or flight, left or right, anxiety, depression thing. But people view that as like, oh, that's too easy. Why would I pay money for somebody to tell me to do that consistently and hold me accountable?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I experience that all the time. I've experienced that conversation my entire career, as you could imagine. I've experienced that in the big leagues. I've experienced that in Major League Baseball. I've experienced that my whole life, my whole time of teaching. I think that the thing that has bothered me a lot and can definitely bother me is the fact that is a conversation. And I think that that's largely when my ego gets in the way of my own self, is that I get frustrated that we deny the truth of walking. I've always been confused. I've gotten this my entire career, literally and I've had recently up to the last month. So over the last 10 years of being in this space professionally, I've had people tell me there's not enough research behind stuff that I do and science behind what I do. And it's the oddest thing, because it's like, why would you ever defend the respiratory system in terms of research? It's probably one of arguably the most researched science-based thing there is. and yet we still have, it's so in our face that we can't see it. And
it's the best way to hide things, right? Is to put it in plain sight. Yeah. And also one of my favorite questions, and this is also the ego getting involved.
Yeah.
It's like people typically will come to you when something's not working.
Yeah.
And so then you make a very suggestive, protocol, like going for a walk, like, doing some of these very simple things that are also seemingly free. And you get that immediate pushback and you pause for a second and you go, you came to me because what you're doing wasn't working.
Right.
And if you always do what you've always done, you'll always be what you've always been. So if you're experiencing the yips, you're experiencing pain, anxiety, these symptoms, maybe that's the body whispering something to you that you should listen, and surrendering to doing something slightly disruptive that's outside of your normal protocols could be helpful.
No doubt. Well, I think it goes, there's two sides to it. I want to touch back on this part about coaching and the thought of like paying for coaching or those sort of things. I think it goes both ways for all of us. It's like, it goes back to what I was saying, is that when you are silent, you get truth. And so that truth can't come from me. And I'll just speak of this as my own practice. Like, I can't give you the truth. I can't tell you what to do. And no, you shouldn't pay me. You shouldn't pay me for that, because you can research, like I said, you can research breathing on your own. You can get all these answers on your own. It is not hard to learn about health in the 21st century. It's just not, it's not difficult to go and do certain things. So really what it comes down to as a practitioner is how well can we hold the integrity of the space? How well can I hold the space for an individual to explore themselves within it? Whether that's playing sound bowls, whether that's rainmakers, whether that's sauna, cold, breathwork, CrossFit, baseball, basketball, it doesn't matter. These are all modalities that we use to help people become more of who they are. And the agreement, I think, the degree of transaction comes into how well I'm also going to pursue that. And that's the bond, I think, of coach to client or teacher to student or coach to player, et cetera, is that the bond is this is going to be the level and expectation and standard in which we hold the agreement of pursuing truth. And my job is to hold that space for you. And that becomes a job. And that's where I think walking becomes like a thing. Like to me, when I walk with people, the walk is my office. And it just makes zero sense to me to have a psychological breakdown or a self-talk therapy session inside a 4-corner room with artificial lights. There's just none of that resonates with me. Now, I'm not saying you can't go do that, but to me, if you take your shoes off and you go for a walk, like our degree of conversation is going to be unbelievably different. And so the only thing that I did as a mental skills coach was go for a walk. And yet that's like, why would I go on a walk with you and pay for that? It's like, it doesn't matter. Like if we don't meet in alignment, then it doesn't matter anyways. But I think what we do as teachers is we create the design, we build the design, and then we hold the space with integrity, and that allows the person to play in it, going back to your sandbox analogy. And I think if we let people play to their highest degree, I think that trust alone builds the transaction where you're going to be fine, finance or whatever, like if that is a monetary pursuit.
I love the word play, man.
Yeah,
It always
I know
like
you do.
Piques my eyebrows and like gets me giddy.
Yeah.
Something that comes to mind there is just in this world that's obsessed with hustle culture and more is better. How can stillness really become a competitive advantage? Because even in stillness, people have the earbuds in, they're constantly listening and doing things. Very rarely do people pause and, like, for lack of a better analogy, smell the roses, feel the wind against their skin, notice the birds and the whistling of the wind in between the trees. How do we make that more popular? How do we make that where it's mainstream culture around just extreme presence and stillness?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the actual answer to that is it's the simple part of what does Biggie say in that movie? I can't remember that Biggie Smalls movie a couple years ago, but Biggie says, we're going to change the world, and P. Diddy or not, I can't remember who says this to him. Somebody says back to him, he goes, we got to change the world, but you got to change yourself. And I don't remember how all that went, but I just remember that part of the movie. And I think that's the answer in its simplest form. I think if you stretch that out to large scale of who we are and what we are, right? It's just my belief that this is the first time the globe's ever been interconnected. I can talk to somebody this afternoon from Australia if I want to. I can communicate with. I was talking to somebody who plays sound bowls in Japan, and we can do that regularly. We're interconnected. So if you look at the social platform and the physical platform, and you look at the physics of just the quantum field of pushing out energy and showcasing energy, well, we're the product of a first time 8 billion person tribe of consciousness. And so largely, I think like we're in the next evolution of the species, and the species is, if it went from whatever the erectus to the sapiens to whatever the next thing is, I think we're in that stage. And I think in order to build a bigger container for the individual consciousness is actually like the greatest gift you can do for the collective consciousness. And so the individual who changes themselves and gets silence and is able to move about material society and the chaos of it with order in themselves. Well, we've already kind of touched on this. Your order in yourself is going to have to be, in my opinion, connected to something above you, a God, a divine, an energy, because that allows you to live outside of material society, live within spirit. And I think that silence will guide your energy. And I just firmly believe we're energetic beings collectively around each other now because of the example I just used of Japan and Australia. And I don't know. I don't think there's any way that at some point in the next couple, whatever, 100 years or so, I'm making up a time frame. I don't think if you're doing that individually, at some point, the consciousness, I would have to imagine, would evolve, because in order to, we no longer can be physically exploring this world. The only way that we can evolve is to actually go inside. You have to explore the silence of what's in you, because that's the only other attention span that you have that's available to you now. Like, your attention externally and materially is used up. There's no shortage of that. So the only way to evolve, in my opinion, is silence. And how we do that, I don't know. I think that it goes back to that quote, like, you will do it first individually on your own. And as energetically as we are at large scale, what if 4 billion.1 do it? Well, then that would start the adaptation period. You know, the adaptation part of consciousness would have to evolve because the scale would be tilted towards internal discovery. I don't know if that's
for sure
making sense.
No, you're hitting the nail on the head there. And to echo things that I've referenced with other guests in the past, I like the concept of working on self first, because it's seemingly a ripple effect. And in air, right now between you and I, we can't see the ripples because they're not in water, so they're not as tangible to the sight.
Yeah.
But if I were to play this game in water, I mean, in theory, we're spiritual beings having a human experience.
100%.
And that spirit has a frequency, and there are energetic chords that, you know, to echo your analogy around the nervous system, they get, you know, flicked by different stimuli.
Yeah.
And there's something to that. Like, where does Bryce end and Harvey begin, and vice versa? And I think that extends so far beyond what our current level of consciousness is. It has to be felt. It has to be explored. It has to be tinkered with in the sandbox to really create a lens and a perspective around that. And there's something that's just so magical about that ideology to me, because so many people just want to rely on fact. If I can't see it or feel it, it doesn't exist. And it's like, okay, but like, when you're in a room and somebody enters that room, you feel something. You feel a presence. Yeah. And if you don't, I challenge you to sit in stillness and be a little bit more in tune with energy and just kind of observing. When you spend time with some people, your cup is filled. When you spend time with other people, you feel drained. Why? Are you talking about people all the time and it's gossip culture? Or are you talking about ideas and exploration, how to push the boundaries and color outside the lines and play with perspective architecture? Those things should be noted because they are so valuable to the human experience. Jordan Peterson talks about, he's like, oh, your life is shit. Who are you spending time with? What's your environment like? What are you consuming? Not just as far as food, but what are you watching? What are you reading? What vibration is entering your headspace? And I think whatever quote, relates to people, I think until you make the unconscious conscious, you're going to kind of keep reliving these stories that are ingrained into our nervous system based on traumas, based on experiences. But like, your experiences in the world are way different than mine. And so sometimes within stillness and the art of simply listening, I can potentially rewire my internal work and be like, oh, I looked at that piece of art or this situation with this set of lenses. Harvey kind of had me look like this, and now I see it way differently. And that was something that didn't land on my headspace before. And the openness to that allows for enhancement of performance, better human experience, and more tools in the toolbox. Free is the way to be. Life beats us up a bit and causes some bumps and bruises, but that doesn't mean we have to stay on the sidelines. This is why we've partnered with Kinyan Labs. Get back to doing what you love with this incredible portable device designed to get you back in the game. Kinyan is on a mission to move people from pain to possible with their top-rated red light therapy and laser solution, which tackles inflammation along with muscle and joint pain quickly and effectively. What I love is that it's portable and rechargeable, making it easy to actually incorporate into my everyday life consistently. It's small, and lightweight, so you can throw it in your gym bag or work bag, or even an overnighter. Kinion's lasers and LED combo make this cutting-edge device extremely versatile for use with general aches and pains, as well as chronic back pain, arthritis, post-surgery recovery, endometriosis, and more. This has been an amazing tool keeping my elbows and knees pain-free for pressing, pulling, and squatting in the gym. Great tools like the Move Plus give me the freedom and flexibility to continue living life on my terms without limitations. There are a lot of reasons why over 15,000 people are using this device and rating it 4.7 stars and above. Head on over to Kinion.io and use code ALLSMITH at checkout to begin your pain-free journey. Where I want to jump in next with you is this really, I don't know, maybe it's a controversial question, but
Yeah.
what's a common misconception about mental performance that you think needs to get debunked? I feel like
Wow.
there's like these psychological judgments that are maybe on mental performance, but they're very real. You see it when people are at the free throw line. You see it when people
Yeah.
go on streaks of strikeouts or, not performing well. And then something seems to happen, whether that's momentum, confidence. What are your thoughts?
So what can you just say the exact question again, just so I can hear it
The
one more time?
common misconceptions about mental performance that you think we can debunk.
Common misconceptions about mental performance. Okay, yeah, I love that. Let's take a shot at this one because this one I've been talking about a lot lately. I think I don't know. I think it's kind of what we were talking about with health, but I would think of it as like in the mental health space or in mental performance space. A lot of times, just the word vulnerability is tossed around. Is that fair? If we start with that one, how's that sound?
Yeah, totally.
So one of the reasons why I talk about this a lot and the importance of this is vulnerability. A lot of stuff in the mental space is so surface in the way in which we want to talk about it. Like in my opinion, I think we touch it as like we poke it out of fear of what it is, and we don't understand the holisticness of the entire organism. So we justify, like you said this earlier about tangible and untangible. Like we can see and touch certain things, so we make it real, right? Which is the reason why I think sauna and ice has become so real in mental performance, because it's tangible. You can say to somebody, do 2 sets of 30 hot, 2 sets of 5 cold, whatever, and then measure your exhale at the end of this and track the difference and try to have a longer exhalation every time you do it. And we're going to retest every 2 weeks, right? And I think that should paint a picture of how that's been important for mental conditioning or mental performance, because it's become tangible. So we've validated the modalities through science and the literature, and then we've created a protocol that we can measure, and that becomes a system that is tangible for people. So I think that these things have helped a lot of mental conditioning is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
But the concern there is that your mind or is that your body, right? Is that your thinking or is that your physicality? And what's subjective and what's objective? And because for whatever reason, I don't know when this really happened, touching the surface of subjectivity is so nerve-wracking to us because of what you've already said about how we all have our own experiences, our own perspective, our own interpretation. We can't meet ever at the actuality of what we perceive as truth. So if you bench 225, we all get to see and physically see the 225, and we counted the reps. So it's a wash. But if you and I were to talk about anything, any subject known to man, we cannot ever come to the actuality of that as truth. We can't get there because our interpretations are different. And I think for that simple reason, it has its stigmas, or it has its stickiness, we'll call it. So one of the examples, that's a long way of saying one of the things that I consider difficult and sticky is the word vulnerability, which has, at least when I was in the profession of baseball, that became like a buzzword for the craft. And if you could be vulnerable, you'd be courageous. and that would help your mental performance. Can we agree on that sentiment at least? Well, the reason why I think these make mental conditioning and mental skills so difficult as an access to pursue as like a valuable thing is that if I was actually vulnerable with you, like to its core, if I'm vulnerable to you materially, you have access to metaphorically crush me. You can kill me metaphorically. You can take my vulnerability and you can use it against me. And so if we're talking about, yeah, exactly. So it's like, what incentive do we have to be vulnerable at any point? And I think that's where it's become so hard in mental training in any aspect, mental health, mental performance, mental skills, is like if someone can't shoot free throws, well, in order to like truly help them, they need to be vulnerable and express things, because not shooting free throws could be from a traumatic experience you had as a 12-year-old. And you're just seeing the product of it as a 28-year-old in professional basketball. Or it could be something that is, for me, having the yips, it could be a byproduct of physiological dysfunction. And I would need to communicate. And maybe I do some things and things come up, but no matter what, it would take me having to be vulnerable. But I know in my core that if I'm vulnerable to any other human being, they have access to crush me. And so naturally, I'm not going to hand that over to anybody. And so I think because of that, the subjective style of mental training, for that exact example, just using one word, there's tons of words, but that one's so relevant because it's so often talked about. I don't think if you're trying to actually think about skill development and working with people, especially professionally, I would actually be the flip side of it. I don't think you should ever be vulnerable, because if you share vulnerability, it can be used against you and it can be crushed with you. And you think about it, how many people do you actually have actual trust with in the material world? I mean, my wife is the closest, and I still can't even get to the absolute actuality of vulnerability with my wife. So how could I ever get vulnerable with someone that I met at the gym 3 weeks ago? And maybe I feel like I am, but I just don't think we can get there. I don't think we can.
I think that's why, though, the beauty of experiences where you can be physiologically vulnerable and not necessarily verbally vulnerable. And then simultaneously, why the integration of third-party resources, whether that is a therapist, whether it is a mental performance coach. I mean, you watch the show Billions.
Yeah.
And Danny Axelrod has access to a mental performance coach / therapist that he can talk through things. And it's a third party that doesn't really have skin in the game in relation to the outcome. And then there's the confidentiality that's associated with that creates, like you said, a container of safety.
Yeah.
And the sauna is kind of like that. It's a safety thing. 100%. And when you make an agreement with people of like, hey, we're going to have an experience here, but the things that are said in here, stay in here.
Yeah.
That breeds trust. And I think within trust allows for vulnerability, which allows the diffusion of courage over the course of time. Beautiful. And then if that trust is broken at some point, that person then has to go through the experience of being cut out of the tribe. And they have to sit with themselves and navigate, here is the consequence for that action. And I think consequences and incentives do a really good job of formulating behavior.
Well said. Do you think that we can be confidential? Meaning, if you give me a piece of information, and I'm sure you've experienced this, think about how many times you've told somebody something and now they have information. It's so hard as the person who now has information to contain that information. So do you think that we actually can be confidential as humans?
It's a really great question. I think we can be confidential. Yes. But I think there's an art to that in the sense of you can have access to information without diffusing whose information that is. And it can be a storytelling or a relational component that can then be used as a teaching component for somebody else, or it can be a testimonial component, but it doesn't have to have specificity as to who it came from, where it came from, or why it came from them, or it has direct correlation to either advancement or depreciation or weaponizing. So I think that
Powerful.
information can be shared, but not necessarily the specificity of whose it is.
Yeah, I like that a lot. But you even have to be aware as the holder of information.
Mm-hmm.
If I go back to this, let me get your thought on this too, because if I go back to vulnerability, we've kind of been talking about, in my last book, I wrote a lot about this. I wrote that what I've come to understand about reality is that there's really just two paths. Like you either are living materially or spiritually. And how you said earlier, your spirit basically comes down here to have a human experience. I firmly believe in that, as you said that earlier. So essentially, I'm born in material mind and body at birth, at my birth date, and I will die at end date, whenever that is. And we will measure that through my birth dates, right? We'll have checkpoints after every year. We do that at an individual level. We do that at a mass scale level. That's New Year's, right? So that's our world's birthday or our country's birthday, whatever. And so, but essentially that's still material. So my soul comes down into the world and it has this material experience in the mind body vehicle. And it has to have all these things that are factual, science, literature driven. So I know the behaviors of psychology are naturally rooted in survival. And the survival rootedness of needing to survive wants me to avoid things like uncertainty, change, attention, and struggle. I naturally want to avoid any of that because it threatens my survival. Now, that material justification of psychology is still rooted in the material world, right? Because the spiritual side of me knows that the actual becoming of who I am, the actual truth of me, which I cannot say, I cannot justify to you, it has to go beyond all that. And you said this to me before we even pressed play, like you had to eventually go all in and you had to go into the unknown. You had to make change. You had to go through struggle. Even this show gives you attention. And so you have all these natural material things that are poking at your ego and your natural instincts to avoid, but to become fully yourself, authentically, we'll say, or unique back to the original child that can just explore and play, you have to go into the fire. So you have to play in the material world from birth to death with your soul. And your soul is this like constant uncovering of itself. And I think that goes back, we've been talking a lot about silence. I think that goes back to the silence. And I use the word vulnerability and mental skills because ultimately, if I use exactly what I just said, and I'm trying to understand that, and we're targeting the word vulnerability. If I'm vulnerable to you materially and I'm entirely consumed in materialism, the material ego of mind body, then yes, there is no incentive for me to be vulnerable with you at any degree because you can crush me. So there's no reason for me to share any information, even if it's a third party. It doesn't matter. Now, if I can have I don't even know how to put this in words to grasp the courage or confidence you would have to have in feeling a connection to your soul as an actuality, having faith in that as an actuality, then vulnerability is not intimidating because you know that there's no human that can crush you. So now you can live authentically and you can be there. But the problem, I shouldn't say it's a problem, the resistance to that is you cannot play at the surface of society and think like that. You can't. You have to be and Eckhart Tolle talks about you live horizontally material, you live vertically in the depth of who you are. And so that's the infinite. That's the limitless of potential in yourself and in your soul. But I think that's the hardest part about mental performance. And I've been in the space, like I said, for 10 years or so, and I've worked in really high levels, fortunately. I have not been able to see it any other way than knowing to get to the truth of anything that you talk about in psychology, it has to get you to a position where you're in some power higher than you that you feel comfortable with. And it allows you to explore all of these things. And
you just hit the nail on the head with the word, though. I don't know that it's getting to a higher power. I think it's going back to a power that we all possess, but we lose our relationship with it. And Ted Lasso said it best, Harvey.
Yes.
Be more curious than judgmental.
Beautiful.
And what happens is we gain context of social conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
We think, hey, if we do this thing, here is said results. Here are the consequences. Here's how it gets weaponized. These people are going to think this. It's going to jeopardize my reputation. I'm going to lose money. Consequence, which becomes a life of fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Beautiful.
When you go through that enough, you eventually get to the point of, as Mark Manson would say, the subtle art of just not giving a fuck.
Yeah.
Okay, you're going to
Nice
judge
try.
me. You're going to weaponize me. So what?
Yeah.
I'm still going to go get buckets in basketball. I'm still going to go put my bat on the ball because I'd rather play and be enrolled in the process of going up to bat thinking, okay, if I'm going to be concerned of what could go wrong, I'm also going to be concerned with what could go right.
100%.
If I'm going to be in this spiritual world, I'm also going to be in this material world.
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with playing in both? Yeah, we're probably spiritual beings, but it's like if we're enrolled in this process, why not be generally curious about it all? You talked about the beauty of going on a walk, and I love to talk about Colin O'Brady, the 12-hour walk that he wrote. And I remember specifically, Harvey, I went on a walk one time up in the high Sierras in the Mammoth area, and I hiked to John Muir's favorite lake. It was called Lake Ediza.
Okay.
And I'd hiked that region before. I'd never gone specifically to that lake, but it was always a measurable of how fast can I get there? You know, how tough can I be when it gets steeper? Can I use the downhills to build some momentum? Can I do X, Y, and Z strategy with my pack or with my arms to just perform fucking better?
Yeah.
I can't remember one of my hikes that I performed in that landscape that I don't remember one.
Yeah.
But the one that I took that was by myself, that I thought, you know what? I'm going to feel the earth beneath my toes. I'm going to pause and reflect and look up and observe the squirrels on occasion. I'm going to see the birds flying. If I find myself out of breath, like I'm just going to notice that. Sometimes I'll go faster. Sometimes I'll pause, maybe have a snack or a little bit of water. My phone's staying on airplane mode. I'm not trying to post stories while I'm on this hike where there's barely any service and just trying to get validation from the external world for being the adventure guy.
Yeah.
It just became eternal presence where it was like, you know what? I don't care if I'm judged anymore. I don't care if somebody wants to make fun of me. I don't care if I get 0 likes on a podcast. I'm doing it for me. And I think going back to some of the famous artists and the famous guy, Rick Rubin, he goes, if you're painting something or you're doing a craft or you're trying to do something, you're doing it for this audience over here. You don't really get the full expression of what's in your heart center and your soul.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it because you think it's freaking dope and it's fun and you're passionate about it and you can feel your energy and your vibration pick up, now you're not chasing the bunny that's going to run away. You're actually attracting the butterfly or the hummingbird towards the blossoming plant. And the plant's there just to be there, just to be beautiful in and for itself. And then as a byproduct, has a relationship now with the human experience. It's a physical thing, but it has a relationship. And so what I think about in relation to what you just said is like our goal is not so much to get to a place, but it's to be so curious within the human experience and ask the questions and wonder why things are the way they are, feel them, touch them, think about why, how, what, ask the 5 whys, share those relationships with other people, and then feel the energy, feel the vibration of curiosity. And when people get judgmental or weaponized against you, it's not positive or negative. I just think it's feedback of like, oh, okay, like, you know, those people aren't really for me. I'm going to go to a different place and I'm going to keep going on this hike towards peak expression, which maybe isn't a place. Maybe it's just to keep hiking.
Yeah.
And somewhere in that process, you gain a tribe and people want to hike with you and you're kind of having fun. And, you know, then there's sometimes you have tiffs with people and they go, I don't want to hike with you anymore. And they go in a different direction. And I don't know, something about that is the picture that I'm seeing as to the human experience is really summarizing being more curious than judgmental.
Yeah. Well, I think you said, I mean, I think I would liken it to the fact of like the child, right? I don't know if I'll bring in some research on this, but are you familiar with, I just came across this recently, George Land, he was a scientist at NASA. Were you ever familiar with the NASA research that they did in the 60s? It's basically what you just said.
Give it to us.
So in the 60s, they did, and I'll know the numbers. I don't remember the exact story how they prompted this, but essentially in the 60s, NASA wanted to find all these geniuses, right? They're like, give us find the geniuses, and I'm pretty sure the guy's name was George Land. And so he goes out and he studies a pocket of just under 2,000 kids who are ages 4 to 5, and he studies their levels of imagination and creativity. And in that study, they found 98% of the kids were categorized as a genius in the form of imagination and creativity. So it startles him, right? He's like, "Oh, I'm going to study this. This seems relevant, especially for what I'm out here trying to do." And so he did a longitude study with them, and he tracked them from like age 4 to 5 to age 10, which is, I think, is roughly like fifth grade, should be fifth grade, fourth to fifth grade. And by the 5 years that they were in the education system, the geniusy marker went from 98% to 30%. And so then they went to age 15. So he did another 5 years and went from 30% to 12%. And by the time this population of people became adults, the level of imagination and creativity that was still in the category of geniusy was at 2%. And so it's a lot of what we've been talking about. I feel like it's a lot of what we've been talking about on this entire conversation, is that somewhere along the lines, we lose our geniusy as we naturally conform and become we lose that curiosity. And I don't know what brings people to it. I don't know what gets us back to it. I don't know what that is. I don't know if is that our cold tubs that transformed us? Is that someone taking a heroic dose of psychedelics? I don't know. Is it breath work? Is it meditation? Is it journaling? Is it artwork? Is it painting? Whatever it is. But according to that quick little study, and largely, I think a lot of people would agree with this, is that when you're a child and you're so not imprinted by the ways of society, your only option is to play. Like, your only option is to imagine and create what you have access to. And so you just explore everything. You just poke and pull and do these things. And so it's a really cool thing to have that little project that they worked on that shows the decreasing in the imagination and creativity as we age. I think it's largely just because it's so hard to maintain going on a hike and being curious about the wind, or being mindful, or being still or silent, or being able to let people go and pass in your life, or being able to say no to something and going this way and trying this way. And as your analogy, to just go towards peak expression. Well, going towards your individual peak expression is not balanced with a 401k or a pension or the salary or the job requirements that your school and education gave to you. It just isn't. It doesn't do that. So in order to do that as an adult, I would imagine you would have to maintain some of the tendencies of that 4 and 5-year-old self that you once were. And how do you express that? How do you justify that to the world? It kind of brings it right back to everything we've been saying.
You're totally spot on, man. And I think if I were to summarize it, kind of give people some tools to walk away with, I'd say, first of all, why can't we do both? Okay, maybe you do have a 40-hour-a-week job that pays the bills, provides a little bit of security, gives you the ability to add value to the world, but also gives you, some cash in your pocket to, check all the boxes, not feel like you're too far out in left field. And, you're slowly and you're participating in the matrix, but you're also understanding what you really want. You're understanding what you're doing.
Yeah.
But then the other side of it is like, man, you want to change the world. You want a beautiful life. We got to find a way to incentivize curiosity. And if we're doing these things over here and it's unlocking reservoirs of psychological potential that then funnel back into the thing that is filling our pockets, it's like, whoa, now these two get to play with each other to the point where, okay, incentivizing curiosity could eventually lead to monetizing curiosity. And then that leads to escaping the matrix, where you have to go, as Rogan would say, to bullshit meetings underneath artificial light, justifying the jobs of managerial people that really don't know what they're doing either, but they want to pretend like they do, so that way they can check the box and tell the higher ups that they're great leaders of organizational structure. And all it really is, hey, we're trying to make more money. We're trying to create control amongst these creative employees that we're treating like zoo animals, so that way we can fit the matrix and justify all the bullshit that we're really doing. That's my rant for the day, man, because so much of this is made up construct, and they use all these big words and they use all these different frameworks to try to intimidate the person that's curious.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, like, we spend our whole lives trying to become adults, and then we spend our whole adult life trying to become children again. Dogs are fucking geniuses. Children are fucking geniuses. And I think if we can be very curious about what makes us feel more alive, we can do both. And within both, we eventually start to play this game of push and pull. It's tug of war between what provides me security and what then provides lighting my heart on fire. Ultimately, we want to be contributors to the world. We want to be valuable. We want to make sure our families are loved and safe. And so it becomes this ratio, this dosage game of like, okay, we'll play this game until we figure out how to escape that game. And it is a game. This whole world is made up. You know, I love the conversation around fact because, okay, great things are research. People are doing amazing things, but fact is really just creating a psychological understanding so we can label it and have a grasp to it. But words are made up. Yeah, language is made up.
Yeah.
The word abracadabra is Aramaic for with my word I create. But to the human experience and to the human psyche, abracadabra means magic.
Yeah.
We magically made up these languages so that way we can grasp hold of things and say fancy words. So that way we can play the game of capitalism. So I don't know. There's a lot to the human experience that I think is yet to be explored and discovered. But I will also say this, going back to part of our early conversation around faith. I was in a messy spot, and something about that led me to Logan, led me to you, led me to Zach, led me to the Sauna and the Ice and Laird Hamilton and the XPT crew. And all it really was I was this young kid that felt like had it figured out being a professional in two different sports.
Yeah.
And that worked until it didn't work anymore, until losing that tangible love from mom and dad. And at that point, I was in search of what it meant to be more alive, and it had nothing to do with my bank account, and it felt more to do with what's going on in between my eyes, my ears, and my heart and my soul.
It's beautiful.
And so whether there's research or not, I know what I felt in the Sauna and Ice.
Yeah.
And I'm going to spend a lot of my life connecting with awesome edge seekers like yourself to share that word and hopefully diffuse those experiences into the hands and the life experiences of others.
Likewise. Well said. I think something that you've said a few times that's so relevant and I couldn't align with more is you keep referencing the ability to do both, which I really love how you're talking about that, because a lot of times when I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I know like when I had my moment or coming to the grips with realizing everything was made up, it turned into nihilism right off the bat. And it was really negative. And the fact that I felt like nothing had any meaning behind it, because it was like, oh, this is all made up. And it was such a shattering. For me, it was after sports, because I had consumed so much of my identity in being a professional athlete. And when that was ripped from me, I couldn't understand how I knew one thing my whole life and I identified with it so well. It's how I got chicks. It's how I got love. It's how I got gratitude. It's how I got friendships. It's how I got invited to places, was being a pro athlete. And once that was ripped from me, I was like, man, what am I ever going to have? I was 26. I was like, what am I ever going to care about that much again in the rest of my life? You know? And I was like, I'm going to spend the next 50 years, 60 years having no meaning like that. And so it was very nihilistic. But then as time went on, the nihilism decreased. And it brought me to what you're saying. It brought me to recognizing the both. It's that this is made up. All these words are made up. That job's made up. All this is made up. We're making something up right now. We're just making it up. You know, we're taking it's metaphysics. We're taking nothing and we're putting it into something. But can I have that recognition and have fun with curiosity playing it, while also knowing it's not made up that I got to take care of my family. It's not made up that I need to respect people and still take care of authority, understand the hierarchies, understand the fabric of society. But you've said that to me. I've heard it through you in this conversation in different ways. I just love how you keep finding ways to package the importance of both and being able to manage both perspectives.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you sharing in that. And as we summarize today, I really do think that in touching on that nihilist component, like, okay, maybe the outcome doesn't mean something. Maybe there's a lot of life that doesn't necessarily have a meaning. But in speaking with people, specifically my parents in deathbed conversations, they spoke in depth around experiences, relationships, and who they became in the process of continually showing up.
Mm.
So whatever you're doing, when you do that with your whole heart to make it a little bit better every single day, maybe it's not about the outcome of the product, but more about you putting the time, effort, attention, and care into trying to better the world in some capacity.
Mm.
And then to echo the late Kobe Bryant, maybe it's not about what we did, but how we motivated and inspired the next generation. Oliver's watching you every single day. The fact that you take time to take him for a walk when you're like, shoot, I got to hop on this call. I got to get my energy right. I have all this laundry list of things to do, but you're like, no, I'm going to carve out specific time to go for a walk with my little man so he can process the world and I can observe that. And we're going to play within this experience, and the key word being play.
Mm-hmm.
You're back to playing. And if we can take play and allow that to tinker with all of our sandboxes and our headspaces, I just think there's a really dope world out there that is going to start floating to the surface. And I do think we're getting back to that. I think people are becoming very apparent that, like, you're seeing spike ball, and it's not always about the score or the outcome. Maybe it's about moving in the sand. Maybe it's about talking shit to your buddy, this tribal culture. We're seeing fireside chats. Like, I originally got into sauna and ice for the physiology, and it turned into like my social hour. I love talking shit with the homies in the sauna and just like
family,
chopping
friends.
it up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I agree.
So maybe it's not about always in pursuit. Maybe it's about being, and in the pursuit of doing, we become something really cool, and we're forging something cool to echo the ALLSMITH ideology. Like we're in extreme heat with adversity, and we're putting that sword underneath the anvil to be sharp, and in some cases it cuts shit, some cases it just looks cool. But we're doing something cool, and I'm so thankful to share that with you today, Harvey.
Yeah, likewise, brother. I love that we connected like this in so many ways. Just listening to you right there is inspiring, and it's cool how many nuggets you've dropped on me in the last couple hours that are going to stick with me. And I think that if I sum up what you said and what we've been talking about, I think it's just back to what we were saying with the energy, because I love the fact of the sauna. I feel the same way. That's what happened to me too. I think that's a natural process for us, right? Is that you come into it with generalization and you need protocols to help you walk the path. And then you realize that it's just the path. And then it just becomes something that you just want to go and sweat with your boys. And you're just like, this is amazing. And I think I agree with you. It's the same thing with meditation. I like just sitting in silence with people. You know, when I first started holding space for people to sit in silence, I used to think about that a lot. Like, why would someone pay me to just like sit here with them? And there's both. There's a transaction side of that financially, and then there's times where I just want to sit with people in silence out of love and maintain that space as well too. I think that we're always doing that. I love how you said earlier, tug of war and push and pull. But yeah, I think it's all energy too, man. I think that's all we're doing. Even this conversation, it's like, what is it? It's just energy. We're just pouring energy into each other. People listen, they pour energy into it, and we're just having a conversation. And I think I'm on that same vein of the collective consciousness of where we're at. I think that we are finding that out. And I think that's what becomes so inspiring, is that you and I haven't talked in a little bit since we saw each other in LA a few years ago. And it's like, but it doesn't matter. Like, you can feel that from person to person, and when you're on that wavelength, I suppose. And so it's just like listening to you is really valuable for me, because you need that. All of us need to help each other fill each other's tanks so that we can keep playing.
Yeah, totally. I heard somebody way smarter than me say this. I think it was from hip hop culture, but he goes, "Game recognize game."
Yeah.
Last thing I'll say, but going back to the business of fitness or the business of health and wellness, I think it's about give to give. I know going through some of life's experiences and taking this deep dive into entrepreneurship, I definitely didn't have it all figured out. And through irony, synchronicity, and my network, I was able to meet this gentleman who's now become my healer. And I pay him for his services. And sometimes we do breath work. Sometimes we do sound healing. Sometimes it's energy work or Reiki. Sometimes he just calls me out on my bullshit. Sometimes he gives me homework assignments. And I love talking about this because I had so much resistance to echo Stephen Pressfield in the beginning of this. I'm like, dude, I'm a professional. I've got this figured out. I have all this access to tools and all these people that I can talk to all the time. Why do I need to pay money to do this thing?
Yeah.
It's skin in the game that holds me accountable. I see the money leaving. So when I'm with him, I am so present because I do want to get a return on investment. Mm-hmm. However, it's give to give. He's also giving me his time, his energy, his attention. He's framing a container for me to actively participate and sometimes word vomit and sometimes just be silent. I'm learning to give, I'm learning to receive, I'm learning to do, but I'm also learning to just be. And I do think that without the original skin in the game and without the financial contribution, I don't place as much original value in the beginning. And I've learned that over the course of time, and it has helped me develop a better relationship with my financial fitness as well. Which I hope to continually share that appropriate language and hopefully have people also experience that because, man, my resistance there was tough. But once I actually did it, it led to my word for 2024, which is commit. Do something disruptive, do something different, and then weigh and measure the man that you're becoming versus the man that you were. And I'm watching my capacity, my ability to love, my ability to attract, my ability to serve just skyrocket simply by committing to this one practice that has now been a trickle down into every other aspect of my life. So I just wanted to share that little tidbit that I think relates to you and your field.
Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you very much for sharing that. I appreciate it. Thank you for the time.
Harvey, where can people find you, man? Where can people find your books? How do they get access to you and all the reservoir of knowledge you've got out there?
Yeah, pretty simple. All my socials are just Harvey J. Martin. Even my website, just www.harveyjmartin.com. So everything's under that vein, Instagram and Twitter and YouTube and whatnot. And then my books, Breathe, Focus, Excel was Human Kinetics, came out in 23. You just go on my website or you can go to their websites and see it. My last book, Without Words, Kohler Books, you can go to them. John Kohler was the publisher of that, or obviously my website too. But yeah, I mean, I post pretty regularly. My podcast, you mentioned it in the beginning, A Moment with Mark. And kind of the same thing, man, just on the same mission, just living, trying to figure it out.
I love it, man. It was such an honor and a pleasure to connect with you today.
Same.
I definitely want to have you on because, dude, I created this whole outline. I was all excited.
Yeah.
And then once we started chopping it up, I was like, nope, none of that. I want to just play. I just want to connect authentically today.
Well, I appreciate that because I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the rap we just had.
That's cool, man. Guys, if you're observing on YouTube or listening on Apple or Spotify, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. Until next time, take care. Thanks, Harvey.